I have done 30 plus certifications and am here to guide you throughout your certification journey. In this video, we will be covering some important questions of the Microsoft AZ-140 exam. You can find the complete PDF of this video and our practice questions through the link down in the description. To the important questions. Question 1. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop. The deployment will use existing virtual machines. You create an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool. You create an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool. You need to ensure that you can add the virtual machines to the host pool. What should you do first? Here in this question, we need to ensure that we can add the virtual machines to the host pool. As such, we should first generate a registration key. Thus, the correct option is B. When adding existing virtual machines to an Azure Virtual Desktop host pool, the first step after creating the host pool is to generate a registration key. This key is required to register the virtual machines with the host pool. Option A is a prerequisite to enable the Azure Virtual Desktop service, but is typically done earlier in the setup process, not specifically before adding virtual machines to the host pool. Question 2. You are designing an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. You identify the network latency between the locations where users reside and the planned deployment. What should you use to identify the best Azure region to deploy the host pool? Here in this question, we need to identify the best Azure region to deploy the host pool. As such, we could use Azure Virtual Desktop Experience Estimator. Thus, the correct option is B. Azure Virtual Desktop Experience Estimator estimates the connection round trip time from your current location to the Azure Virtual Desktop service to each Azure region in which you can deploy virtual machines. Question 3. Your company has 60,000 users. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop. You need to recommend a storage solution for the FS profile containers. The solution must provide the highest possible IOPs and the lowest latency desktop experience. What should you recommend? Here in this question, based on the stated requirements, we should recommend Azure NetApp files. Thus, the correct option is B. Running performance intensive and latency sensitive file workloads in the cloud can be hard. Azure NetApp Files makes it easy for enterprise line of business and storage professionals to migrate and run complex file-based applications with no code change. Azure NetApp Files is widely used as the underlying shared file storage service in various scenarios. These include migration of ISO 6 compliant Linux and Windows applications, SAP HANA databases, high performance compute infrastructure, and apps and enterprise web applications. Question 4. You have an Azure subscription that contains 500 users. The users are assigned Microsoft Office 365 E1 licenses. You deploy an Azure virtual desktop solution that contains Windows 10 multi-session hosts and streams a custom remote app named App1. You need to ensure that users are licensed to stream App1. The solution must minimize costs. Which license should you use? Here in this question, we need to ensure that the users are licensed to stream app 1 while minimizing costs. As such, we should use Windows 10 Enterprise E3 licenses. Thus, the correct option is D. The app v client must be enabled on any client device on which apps will be run from the app v server. These will be the Windows 10 or 11 Enterprise E3 devices. Question 5. You deploy an Azure virtual desktop host pool named Pool1. You have an Azure storage account named Store1 that stores access logix profile containers in a tier named profiles. You need to configure the path to the storage containers for the session hosts. Which path should you use? Here in this question, we need to configure the path to the storage containers for the session hosts. As such, the path that we should use is /store1.file.core.windows.net/profiles. Thus, the correct option is C. Question 6. You plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop Session Host virtual machines based on a pre-configured master image. The master image will be stored in a shared image gallery. You create a virtual machine named Image1 to use as the master image. You install applications and apply configuration changes to Image1. You need to ensure that the new session host virtual machines created based on Image1 have unique names and security identifiers. What should you do on Image1 before you add the image to the shared image gallery? Here in this question, we need to ensure that the new session host virtual machines created based on image1 have unique names and security identifiers. As such, before we add the image to the shared image gallery, we should at a command prompt run the sysprep command on image1. Thus, the correct option is B. The Sysprep tool prepares the master image by generalizing it. This removes system-specific data such as the computer name and security identifiers, ensuring that each session host created from the image has unique values. Question 7. You have an Azure virtual desktop host pool. The pool contains session hosts that run Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. You connect to a remote desktop session on poll 1 and discover an issue with the frequency of screen updates. You need to identify whether the issue is related to insufficient server, network, or client resources. The solution must minimize how long it takes to identify the resource type. Here in this question, we need to identify the resource type this issue is related to with the minimum amount of time. As such, we should, from within the current session, use Performance Monitor to display the values of all the remote effects graphics bracket asterisks slash frames skipped slash second counters. Thus, the correct option is D. Using Performance Monitor and tracking the remote FX graphics brackets asterisks slash frames slash second counters helps identify resource constraints affecting screen update frequency. This method allows you to point whether the issue lies with server performance, network bandwidth, or client side rendering, minimizing diagnostic time. Question 8. You have an Azure Active Directory tenant named contoso.com. You use a user account named admin1 to deploy an Azure AD domain services managed domain name aaddcontoso.com to a virtual network named VNet1. You plan to deploy an Azure virtual desktop host pool named Pool1 to VNet1. You need to ensure that you can use the admin1 user account to deploy Windows 10 Enterprise certain hosts to Pool1. What should you do first? Here in this question, we need to ensure that we can use the admin1 user account to deploy Windows 10 Enterprise certain hosts to Pool1. As such, we should first add admin1 to the AADDC administrators group of contours.com. Thus, the correct option is A. Question 9. You have an Azure virtual desktop host pool named Pool1 that contains the following: a linked workspace named Workspace1, an application group named Default Desktop, a session host named Host1. You need to add a new data disk. What should you modify? Here in this question, in order to add a new data disk, we should modify Host1. Thus, the correct option is A. AVD certain hosts are just VMs that appear in virtual machines in the Azure portal. Therefore, you manage them in the same way as any other virtual machine. Question 10. You have an Azure virtual desktop deployment. You need to create a host pool. The solution must ensure that during periods of low CPU usage, credits can be accumulated and then used to raise performance above the purchased baseline during periods of high CPU usage. Which virtual machine series should you specify when you create the pool? Here in this question, we need to ensure that during periods of low CPU usage, credits can be accumulated, and during the periods of high CPU usage, we can use them to raise performance. As such, the virtual machine series that we should specify when we create the pool is B series. Thus, the correct option is D. The B series virtual machines are designed for workloads with fluctuating CPU usage. They accumulate credits during periods of low CPU usage, which can then be used to boost performance during high CPU demand. This makes them ideal for cost-efficient deployments with variable workloads such as Azure Virtual Desktop Session Hosts. Question 11. You have an Azure Virtual Desktop deployment. You plan to use fslogix profile containers. You need to recommend a solution that will be used to store the containers. The solution must meet the following requirements. The containers must be stored on solid state drives, minimize administrative effort, minimize cost. What should you recommend? Here in this question, based on the given requirements, we should recommend Azure Files Premium. Thus, the correct option is D. Azure Files Premium uses solid-state drives, ensuring high performance for Logix profile containers, integrates seamlessly with Azure Virtual Desktop, minimizes administrative effort with managed file shares, and offers lower costs compared to Azure NetApp files. Version 12, you plan to deploy Azure Virtual Desktop. You are deploying storage spaces direct to a cluster that will store Slogix profile containers. The cluster will not use Cloud Witness. What is the minimum number of virtual machines required for the cluster? Here in this question, the minimum number of virtual machines that is required for the cluster is 2. Thus, the correct option is B. Storage Spaces Direct is a software-defined storage solution that allows you to share storage resources in your converged and hyper-converged IT infrastructure. Enables you to combine internal storage drives on a cluster of physical servers into a software-defined pool of storage. Question 13. You have an Azure virtual desktop deployment that contains a host pool named Pool 1. Pool 1 contains 10 session hosts that were deployed by using an Azure Resource Manager template. You discover that Windows licenses were not applied to the session host. You need to use a PowerShell script to update the licenses. Which CMDlet should you include in the solution? Here in this question, we need to use a PowerShell script to update the licenses. As such, we should include the update AZVM CMDlet in the solution. Thus, the correct option is A. Question 14. You have a Azure virtual desktop host pool. You need to install Microsoft anti-malware for Azure on the session hosts. What should you do? Here in this question, we need to install Microsoft anti-malware for Azure on the session hosts. As such, we should add an extension to each session host. Thus, the correct option is A. The easiest way to install Microsoft anti-malware for Azure on Azure virtual desktop session hosts is to use the Microsoft anti-malware extension. This method automates deployment and configuration, minimizing manual effort. Question 15. You have an Azure virtual desktop deployment. You have a remote app named App 1. You discover that from the Save as dialog box of App 1, users can run executable applications other than App 1 on the certain hosts. You need to ensure that the users can run only published applications on the session hosts. What should you do? Here in this question, we need to ensure that the users can run only published applications on the session hosts. As such, we should configure an app locker policy on the session hosts. Thus, the correct option is D. App locker policies allow you to control which applications and executables users can run on the session hosts. By configuring an app locker policy, you can restrict users to running only published applications like App 1, preventing them from executing unauthorized programs. Question 16. You deploy an Azure virtual desktop session host pool that includes 10 virtual machines. You need to provide a group of pilot users access to the virtual machines in the pool. What should you do? Here in this question, we need to provide a group of pilot users access to the virtual machines in the pool. As such, we should create a role assignment. Thus, the correct option is D. To provide access to the Azure Virtual Desktop Session Host, you must add the users to the remote desktop users group on the virtual machines. This ensures they have permissions to connect remotely to the session hosts in the pool. Question 17. You have a hybrid Azure tenant. You plan to deploy an Azure Virtual Desktop Personal Host Pool. The host pool will contain 15 virtual machines that run Windows 10 Enterprise. The virtual machines will be joined to the on-premises Active Directory domain and used by the members of a domain group named Department 1. You need to ensure that each user is added automatically to the local administrators group on the virtual machine to which the user signs in. What should you configure? Here in this question, we need to ensure that each user is added automatically to the local administrators group on the virtual machine to which the user signs in. As such, we should configure a policy preference in the policy object. Thus, the correct option is C. Question 18. You have an Azure virtual desktop deployment that contains a host pool named Pool 1. Pool 1 contains two session hosts named Host 1 and Host 2. You need to enable screen capture protection for the deployment. What should you do? Here in this question, we need to enable screen capture protection for the deployment. As such, we should configure a group policy setting on host 1 and host 2. Thus, the correct option is E. To enable screen capture protection for an Azure virtual desktop deployment, you must configure the appropriate group policy setting on the session hosts. This feature prevents users from capturing or sharing screenshots of the session. Question 19. You have an Azure virtual desktop deployment. You plan to use just-in-time VM access to manage session host virtual machines. You need to recommend license requirements for JIT VM access. Your solution must minimize costs. Which license should you recommend? Here in this question, we need to recommend license requirements for JIT VM access while minimizing costs. As such, we should recommend Microsoft Defender for Servers Plan 1. Thus, the correct option is C. Microsoft Defender for Servers Plan 1 includes JIT VM access and offers a cost-effective way to manage access while maintaining security. Microsoft Defender for Servers Plan 2 provides additional features such as more advanced threat protection and security management, but it's not necessary for just-in-time access and would incur additional costs. Therefore, Plan 1 is the most cost-effective solution. Question 20. You have a new Azure subscription that uses Azure Virtual Desktop. You need to ensure that users who connect to Azure Virtual Desktop sessions re-authenticate every 6 hours. What should you do first? Here in this question, we need to ensure that users who connect to Azure Virtual Desktop sessions re-authenticate every 6 hours. As such, we should first create a conditional access policy. Thus, the correct option is A. To ensure that users re-authenticate every 6 hours, you should create a conditional access policy in Azure Active Directory. This policy can be configured to enforce re-authentication at specified intervals, such as every 6 hours, for users connecting to Azure virtual desktop sessions. Question 21. You have an Azure virtual desktop deployment that contains a host pool named pool1. You plan to create a Windows 10 image named image1 to deploy new session hosts to pool1. You need to ensure that all the new session hosts deployed by using image1 are onboarded on Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. What should you do? Here in this question, we need to ensure that all the new session hosts deployed by using image1 are onboarded to Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. As such, we should add a Defender for Endpoint onboarding script to image1 and then run the script at first start. Thus, the correct option is B. Question 22. You have an Azure virtual desktop deployment that contains a host pool named pool1. Pool1 contains 10 session hosts. You need to enable screen capture protection on all the session hosts in pool1. The solution must minimize administrative effort. What should you do? Here in this question, we need to enable screen capture protection on all the session hosts in pool1 while minimizing administrative effort. As such, we should first, to each session host, add an extension. Thus, the correct option is C. Question 23. You have an Azure virtual desktop deployment. You need to secure administrative access to session hosts. The solution must require that administrators use the Azure portal to access the session hosts. What should you include in the solution? Here in this question, we need to ensure that administrators need to use the Azure portal to access the session hosts. As such, we should include conditional access policies in the solution. Thus, the correct option is C. To secure administrative access to session hosts and ensure that administrators use the Azure portal, you can configure conditional access policies in Azure Active Directory. These policies can enforce restrictions such as requiring administrators to authenticate through specific methods and can control access based on conditions like location or device compliance. Azure Bastion is used for providing RDP/SSH connectivity, but for controlling access via the Azure portal with conditional access, option C is the most appropriate choice. Question 24. You have an Azure virtual desktop deployment. You publish a remote app named App Version 1. You need App Version 1 to appear in the remote desktop client as sales contact application. Which PowerShell CMDlet should you use? Here in this question, we need App Version 1 to appear in the remote desktop client as sales contact application. As such, we should use the update AZ-140 application CMDlet. Thus, the correct option is D. Question 25. You have an Azure virtual desktop deployment that contains the following: a host pool named pool1. To session hosts named host 1 and host 2, an application group named remote app 1 that contains a remote app named app 1. You need to prevent users from copying and pasting between app 1 and their local device. What should you do? Here in this question, we need to prevent users from copying and pasting between app 1 and their local device. As such, we should modify the RDP properties of pool 1. Thus, the correct option is D. Question 26. You have an Azure virtual desktop host pool that contains 20 Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session hosts. Users connect to the Azure virtual desktop deployment from computers that run Windows 10. You plan to implement FSLogix application masking. You need to deploy application masking rule sets. The solution must minimize administrative effort. So where should you copy the rule sets? Here in this question, we need to deploy application masking rule sets while minimizing administrative effort. As such, we should copy the rule sets to C column slash program files slash fslogix slash apps slash rules on every session host. Thus, the correct option is C. For fslogix application masking, rule sets should be deployed to the C column slash program files slash fslogix slash apps slash rules directory on every session host. This approach ensures that the rule sets are applied consistently across all session hosts and minimizes administrative effort. The rule sets are processed on the session hosts, not on individual user profiles. Question 27. You have an Azure virtual desktop host pool named Pool1. You are troubleshooting an issue for a remote desktop client that stopped responding. You need to restore the default remote desktop client settings and unsubscribe from all workspaces. Which command should you run? Here in this question, we need to restore the default remote desktop client settings and unsubscribe from all workspaces. As such, we should run the msr dcw command. Thus, the correct option is A. The msr dcw command is used to launch the remote desktop connection client for Windows and can also be used for troubleshooting, including resetting the settings and unsubscribing from workspaces. Question 28. You have an Azure virtual desktop deployment. You need to provide external users with access to the deployment. The external users have computers that run Windows 10 Pro and Windows 10 Enterprise. The users do not have the ability to install applications. What should you recommend that the users use to connect to the deployment? Here in this question, we should recommend the users to use remote desktop connection to connect to the deployment. Thus, the correct option is D. You can use Microsoft Edge to access an Azure virtual desktop via the web client, which allows users to connect without needing to install a separate application. The web client is particularly useful for users who cannot install applications or are on devices that don't support the remote desktop client. However, remote desktop connection remains the most direct option for Windows 10 users who already have the RDC client installed. Question 29. Your network contains an on-premises Active Directory domain The domain contains a universal security group named AVD users. You have a hybrid Azure AD tenant. AVD users syncs to Azure AD. You have an Azure virtual desktop host pool that contains four Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session hosts. You need to ensure that only the members of AVD users can establish Azure virtual desktop sessions to the host pool. What should they do? Here in this question, we need to ensure that only the members of AVD users can establish Azure virtual desktop sessions to the host pool. As such, we should assign AVD users to an application group. Thus, the correct option is D. D is correct. By assigning them to the application group, they would then appear for the respective remote apps and associated DAG. Question 30. You deploy multiple Azure virtual desktop session hosts that have only private IP addresses. You need to ensure that administrators can initiate an RDP session to the session hosts by using the Azure portal. What should you implement? Here in this question, we need to ensure that administrators can initiate an RDP session to the session hosts by using the Azure portal. As such, we should implement Azure Bastion. Thus, the correct option is C. Azure Bastion is a new, fully platform managed platform as a service you provision inside your virtual network. Provides secure and seamless RDP/SSH connectivity to your VMs directly in the Azure portal over SSL. When you connect via Azure Bastion, your virtual machines do not need a public IP address. These were all the questions for this video. You can find the complete PDF of this video and our practice questions through the link down in the description. We will be publishing more parts to this series in the future, so please make sure to subscribe our channel and press the bell icon. Thank you for watching and stay tuned.